my family, I was always the backup plan, not the first choice. Not the one people bragged about at family gatherings. Just a quiet second option waiting in the background in case something went wrong. My older brother Leo was the opposite. Leo was the golden child. Everything about him seemed to shine in the eyes of my parents. His grades were celebrated, his mistakes were forgiven, and every success he had was treated like a family victory. When Leo won a sports trophy, my parents framed it and hung it in the living room. When I brought home good grades, my report card was quietly placed in a drawer. It wasn't that my parents hated me. At least, that's what I used to tell myself. They simply loved Leo more. And for most of my life, I learned to live with that difference. But the day Leah's kidneys began to fail, everything changed. Suddenly, the golden child was fragile. Suddenly, the center of my parents' universe was lying in a hospital bed looking pale and weak. The house felt different after the diagnosis. Quieter. Heavier. Heavier. It was the kind of silence that hangs in the air when everyone knows something terrible is happening, but nobody wants to say it out loud. My mother cried constantly. At breakfast, at dinner, sometimes she would simply sit at the table staring at nothing, tears sliding down her face. My father handled it differently. He became more serious, more focused. He spoke about responsibility, about family duty, about the importance of blood. And eventually, the conversation turned toward me, not with a question, with a plan. They didn't ask if I would help Leo. They told me when the surgery was scheduled. They said the doctors believed I was the best possible match. After all, I was his brother. Same blood, same DNA. My father said something that stayed with me for weeks. He told me that saving Leo wasn't just an act of love. It was my duty. He said it was my responsibility to protect the family legacy. The words sounded noble, but the way they said them felt like pressure. Every meal became a reminder. My mother would look at Leah's pale face and begin crying again. My father would talk about how families survive difficult times by sacrificing for each other. Sometimes they didn't even speak directly to me. They simply talked about the surgery as if my decision had already been made, as if my body already belonged to the solution. At first I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe this was just how families behave during crises. Maybe this was normal. But slowly, something began to feel wrong. The conversations weren't about Leo's recovery. They were about my obligation. And every time I hesitated, the atmosphere in the room grew colder. My father would sigh heavily. My mother would wipe away tears and whisper about how Leo might not survive. I started to feel like a monster for even thinking twice. That's how pressure works inside families. It rarely arrives as a direct command. Instead, it appears as guilt, as emotional expectations, as the quiet suggestion that love must be proven through sacrifice. Eventually, I agreed to take the tests. Blood samples, compatibility screening, DNA markers. The hospital staff treated everything as routine, just another step in the process. But then the doctor asked me to sit down. His tone changed. It wasn't the calm, professional voice doctors usually use when explaining procedures. It was the careful voice people use when they know they're about to say something that will change someone's life. He placed the lab report on the desk between us. And he said something I will never forget. He told me that based on the DNA markers, it was biologically impossible for me to be a match for Leo. Not unlikely. Impossible. Because according to the test results, I wasn't my father's son. For a few seconds, the room felt completely silent. The doctor continued speaking, explaining the genetic mismatch, the paternity markers, the way certain DNA patterns must align between siblings. But I barely heard the rest. My mind was already racing backward through every memory I had of my family. The way my father sometimes looked at me differently. The way my mother treated me with quiet distance. The way Leo was always the center of everything. Suddenly, those memories felt less like coincidences and more like clues. The doctor asked if I wanted to talk about it, but there was nothing to say. Instead, I took the report and went home. When I arrived, my parents were sitting at the dinner table. Leo was there too, pale and tired. Leo was there too, pale and tired. For the first time in months, nobody was speaking. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply placed the lab report in the center of the table. My father picked it up. He began reading. And slowly, the color drained from his face. He read the line that said, 0% paternity match. Then he read it again. Across the table, my mother suddenly reached for the paper. Her hands were shaking. For years, she had carried herself like the moral center of the family. The strong one, the one who believed in loyalty and tradition. But in that moment, the mask cracked. My father looked at her. Not angrily. Not even loudly. Just quietly. The kind of quiet that feels heavier than any argument. 25 years. That's how long she had kept the secret. 25 years of letting my father believe I was his son. 25 years of raising me in a house where I always felt like an outsider. And suddenly, everything made sense. The distance. The favoritism. The way she sometimes looked at me with an expression that was hard to describe. It wasn't hatred. It was guilt. In psychology, there is something called cognitive dissonance. It happens when someone holds two conflicting truths at the same time. My mother had a secret that threatened the image of the perfect family. So she solved the conflict in the only way her mind allowed. She convinced herself that I deserved the distance. That I was somehow different. That I wasn't as good as Leo. By treating me like the difficult son, she made it easier to live with the lie. But the medical crisis had exposed everything. The DNA test had become what I now think of as the genetic receipt. Proof of a debt she never intended to pay. After the truth came out, nobody yelled. Nobody fought. The house simply went silent. My father stopped speaking almost entirely. My mother tried to explain. She said it happened before the marriage. She said she was afraid of losing everything. She said she didn't know how to tell the truth. And then she said something that stunned me. She asked if I would still do the surgery. Even knowing the truth, she said Leo still needed help. She said the family still needed me. In that moment, something inside me finally shifted. For most of my life, I had tried to earn a place in that house. To prove I belonged. To show that I was just as worthy of love as the golden child. But the truth was finally, I had never been part of the plan. I had only been the backup. The spare. The extra piece that could be used when the family needed something. A spare kidney. A spare kidney. A spare son. A spare son. A spare part, so I said if she wanted to save Leo with family blood, she should find the man who actually shared it with him. Then I went upstairs and packed my bags. I didn't take much. Just the things that belonged to me. Clothes. Books. Boys. A few photos. When I walked out of the house that night, nobody tried to stop me. My father remained at the table staring at the lab report. My mother was crying again. Leo didn't say anything. Maybe he didn't know what to say, but for the first time in my life, I understood something important. Family isn't defined by the pressure to sacrifice. It isn't defined by guilt. And it certainly isn't defined by secrets. Real family is built on honesty, on respect, on the understanding that love should never require someone to destroy themselves to prove they belong. Walking away that night felt terrifying, but it also felt like freedom, because I realized something that had taken 25 years to understand. I was never meant to be the backup plan. I was never meant to be the spare part. And from that moment forward, I would never allow anyone to treat me like one again. Now I'm curious what you think. Is blood really thicker than water if that blood is built on a lie? Or was walking away the only honest choice left? Tell me what you think, and if you've ever experienced a moment where a family secret changed everything, share your story. Because sometimes the truth doesn't destroy a family. Sometimes it finally reveals what the family really was all along.